Halstead, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. I'm today going to talk to you, as you know, about asking as an intentional conversation, what to say when you ask and when to say it. This is a presentation, a webinar that I've developed over the years, and I think you'll find it really useful. Before I get going, though, let me just talk about a couple of housekeeping details. You know, I'm sure that you can type questions in on the right-hand side of your screen. If you type questions in, I'll do my best to keep an eye open for them as I present, as I talk. But if I don't get to them while I'm bulldozing ahead, I will for sure get to them at the end. So why don't you type in, just so I see you're there, type in where you are in the country. I'm always happy to see where you are. If you would type in so I can tell. Hi, Shauna and Casper in Missouri and Wendy in New Jersey. Let's see, Christy in Seattle, Meg in St. Helena, California, Anaheim, Rosa, Jody in Boise. Is that Yazoo City, June? Marin County, Rice Lake, Wisconsin, California, Casa Grande. Thank you very much. Paula in San Clemente. Hi there. Hi, June. Hi, Joe in Goldsboro, North Carolina. I'm so happy to have you all with me today. You know, no matter how many times I do these webinars, it always strikes me as strange that I sit here and talk to my computer screen and try to envision you sitting inside it or something like that. Anyway, type in your questions as I go. I'll be happy to answer them either then or later on. I believe that Heather sent you an email with these slides, a PDF of these slides, and a notes page. If you haven't gotten that and typed it out yet and you want it, you can see that here on your panel as well. You can just download them and take notes right on them. That's helpful for some people. I'm planning we're going to be here together for about an hour. If the questions run over that, that's fine. But I don't know. I think it's a long time to sit for longer than an hour. So if we can wrap it up in an hour 10, that'd be great. So I think that covers the housekeeping, and let me dive right in. Asking as an intentional conversation. What to say when you ask and when to say it. Well, before we talk about asking, I want to introduce you to two characters that I think are so important in your understanding of asking, because they come up for all of us no matter how long we've been in the business and how many times we ask. The first one is lizard brain. You ever felt afraid? You ever feel nervous? You ever feel like all your adrenaline is jumping around at you? Of course you do. That's what I call your lizard brain. Other people have written about lizard brain as well. It's the part of your brain that triggers fear. It's the part of your brain that really wakes you up. It's a powerfully important part of who you are, because it's the part of you, your brain, that keeps you safe. It tends to trigger very quickly. If you smell smoke, for example, you're going to smell it, and your lizard brain's going to trigger almost immediately. But it also triggers when you're asking people for help, when you're asking people for money in particular. And because it triggers so quickly, it's often what's most present in your mind. Now, if lizard brain were the only part of you that existed, or a part of us that existed, we would be in sorry state. But for most people, lizard brain is countered by what I refer to as lion heart. That's the part of you that wants to reach out and connect to people. It's the part of you that wants to be kind. It's the part of you that wants to be in community with other people. And these two characters, lizard brain and lion heart, create a delicate balance. It's like they're on a teeter-totter. Is that still a word we use? A seesaw? a teeter-totter. Now, some people who write about these things present them as though they are in sort of powerfully pushing against one another, but that's not the image I think of. I think that for each one of us, we have lizard brain active and lion brain active, and it doesn't take very much to shift the balance. It's sort of this exquisite balance that we have going for us. Let me go back here. If you think about it that way, right, it's not that you have to do very much to force yourself to get yourself into the community mode or to immediately flip back into the lizard brain mode. They just are finely attuned to one another. Now, I want you to think about lizard brain and lionheart not only as characters in you, the person who's going to be asking for money or anything else, but of course these are also characters that are in the minds of the people who are your donors. Think about it this way. You may be afraid to ask. Your lizard brain lights up because you're afraid people are going to say no. Your donors, their lizard brain lights up because they're afraid you're going to ask them for more than they can give. They're afraid you're going to take something from them, and it makes them want to hang on to it more tightly, sort of like Gollum. Right? But of course, with your donors, they too have a lion heart part of them that would like to give. And as askers, all you're doing is trying to tip the balance a little towards lion heart instead of lizard brain. So keep that in mind in the fundraising world. Realize that your job as a development director or an executive director or anybody who's asking is not to eradicate lizard brain. It's just to tip the balance slightly so that you and the people you're talking to want to reach out and be in community with one another, to be generous with one another. Now, this webinar, as you know, the asking process is really more complicated than just asking. The fundraising process is more complicated than just asking. It roughly goes through 5 steps: selecting the prospect, preparing to meet the prospect, scheduling the meeting, and then following through. But on today's webinar, really all we're going to be talking about are the 2 red ones of these: scheduling the meeting and meeting. So why am I starting with scheduling the meeting? Honestly, in all my years in the fundraising business, what I found is that scheduling the meeting is probably the most difficult part of what we do. That's where we're likely to get objections, among other things. But I find that if I can get people to actually set up time to schedule meetings, that then they will be effective fundraisers. And if I can't get them to do that, if they can't get themselves to schedule the meeting, they won't be. It's really that simple. Because of course, once you have a meeting scheduled, you're likely to follow through. You're going to go and you're going to talk to the donor. And once you go and talk to the donor, schedule a meeting and talk to the donor, the chances are super good you're going to get a gift. I mean, after all, what donor is likely to agree to meet with you when they're totally unwilling to make a gift? That doesn't happen very often, does it? So here's what you're going to do to set up the meeting. You'll send either a letter or an email or maybe both, telling your donor what it is you're going to talk to them about. And that's important, by the way. You don't want to bait and switch. You don't want to say, let's go have a lovely lunch together, and then at the very end of the lunch you say, by the way, I want to ask you for a gift. No. You're going to want to actually set it up so that the person you're talking to knows what it is you're coming to talk to them about, namely asking them for a gift or asking them for something else. All right, after you've sent a letter or an email, you probably will call to schedule. Though these days, people often just use email as the best scheduling tool. If you call to schedule, and I advise you to do that if you can, that's where you're likely to handle objections, to get objections and to handle them. And your task is to persist, is not just to let them off the hook, right? Once you've gotten that, we'll talk a little more about that in the next slide. Then you're going to confirm the time and location of the visit so that you're set to go. Now, let's talk about objections. I'll bet all of you, if you've called to schedule a meeting with someone, with a donor, you will have heard one of these things. I'm too busy. I don't have any time. There's no need to meet. I'll just send a check. Oh, you know, I have 3 kids in college now. This is not a good time to come and talk to me about money. Or occasionally you hear, I'm not interested. But that's probably the least frequent thing you'll hear when you get objections from people. Now, when people say to you, you call, you say, Sue, I'd like to come and talk to you about a gift, your annual gift to the Boys and Girls Club. This is the time. And it's really important that we talk. And Sue says to you, no, I have no time this year. I am just way over my head. I'm too busy. I'll send a check. Thanks very much, Andrea, but let's do this another time. Ha. What am I going to say? What am I going to say? Well, I'm going to try the 3 F's. Now, this is a standard sales technique, and I have to say that it works. The 3 F's, feel, felt, and found. So I might say something like, Sue, I understand how you feel. Boy, it's just a crazy busy time for me too. I mean, I'm just way over my head. But really, I have found that it is so important that I come and actually talk face to face with people about what we're doing and about what they're thinking and about what their current interests are in the Boys and Girls Club, right? That I'd really love it if you would be willing to set aside half an hour for me. Feel, felt, found. I understand how you feel. I've felt that too, but I found that it really matters if we get together. What happens is that they're likely, the person you're talking to is likely to say, well, okay, how about next week? Now, what this feel, felt, found approach does is that it puts you on the same page with the person who is objecting. And in doing that, it gives their lizard brain a moment to step back, and it tips the balance over to Lionheart. It's interesting. Remember I said that lizard brain triggers really quickly, that's the first thing that happens? So chances are when you call and say, Sue, let's schedule a time to get together to talk about your Boys and Girls Club gift, her lizard brain triggers, that Andrea Kill said she's coming to talk to me, and I don't really want to give more, and she wants more than I can give, and that's the immediate response. And I'm too busy and everything else. If I create a little time by doing feel, felt, found, it'll give her Lionheart a minute to kick in, and the chances are good you're going to get a meeting. See, here's what's happened. Lionheart has just stepped forward just a bit. Doesn't mean that lizard brain's still not present. It doesn't mean that when you walk in the door, she's not going to be a little hesitant because she knows what you're talking to her about. But you've given a little tip to the balance of that, right? And now when you go and actually have the meeting, right, you've at least got a fair shot or a better shot. Because remember, Sue, the donor, actually by that time has agreed to meet with me, right? And once she's agreed to meet with me, right, she's going to be in a strange time if I go in to meet with her and she said, you know, really, I decided a long time ago I wasn't going to give anymore. That's not going to happen, right? Okay. So when you actually have the meeting, right, you've done everything you need to do, schedule the visit, you've scheduled the visit, you actually are heading into the meeting. What do we have to say about the meeting? So I have spent a lot of time working on this. Let me tell you why I've done that. You know, I've been in the fundraising business a very long time. You perhaps know that I am well known in this business in capital campaigns as a capital campaign consultant and writer. I have a big book on capital campaigns that actually has just come out in its 4th edition. And over the years, if you are a capital campaign consultant, one of your jobs is to train people to ask for money, right? To train the people who are on the campaign steering committee and the board to ask for money. So I've done a lot of training over the years. And what I found for years is that I would go in and do a training, and I thought I was a pretty good trainer. But the people who were already good askers left as good askers and left excited, and the people who were not good askers and didn't know anything about asking left as intimidated as they had ever been. And the kind of training I did was sort of the standard objections-based training, where you go in and you make the case, and you ask for the gift, and you overcome objections, and then they either do or do not give you the gift, and then you leave. And I thought to myself, you know, this way of thinking about asking is simply not right. So I went through a long exploration to try to figure out something better, and I think I finally came up with something. And that's what I'm going to share with you here today. I came up with this idea that asking is one kind of intentional conversation. Right? Quite simply, that's a conversation where you go in as an asker, you go in with an intention of what it is you want to come out with. I mean, it's that simple. We have intentional conversations all the time. We have intentional conversations with our kids and with our partners and with our friends. We have intentional conversations with our bosses, right? Where we're going to go into our boss and we want them to do something. We're asking them to do something. We have a clear intention. So asking for money is just one of that set of conversations. And before we get to the end of this session, I'm actually going to walk you through a very specific non-fundraising intentional conversation. So you can see how you can use this approach in things that have nothing to do with fundraising. So in this conversation, we are taking someone from here to there. Now, how are we going to do it? Well, if you've had a standard fundraising, a standard asking conversation, if you've done a lot of solicitation, you may well have encountered this. Sometimes I think that it's what I most fear in asking, that I will have gone in, I will have started making my pitch, I'll look up, and this is what I'm going to see in the face of the people that I'm soliciting. Has that ever happened to you? You look up and you know they are bored to tears, right? Or you look up and you realize that the other person is glancing down at his or her watch and can't wait for this meeting to be over. And you know this is not good, right? What you've done here is that you've created literally a wall of words. And unfortunately, when you see people respond that way, most of us, myself included, I'm afraid, have the response of simply talking more. We get anxious, and we have the sense that maybe we're going to find a word that's going to wake up our donor, that's going to connect. And what happens is that the wall of words gets bigger and higher. It's very sad. And we feel helpless, but we keep right on talking. What we really want is for our conversation, our asking conversation, to look like this, right? We want it to be a real conversation where they're listening to us, where we're listening to them, where we're connecting. We're not building a wall. We're reaching across the space and literally talking to one another as though we were partners and friends. I mean, partners is really a core concept, I think, when you're asking someone for a gift. So how do we get the conversation to look like that? Well, here's a model for you. I've created a 6-part pattern for intentional conversations. You can see it here, big on the screen. And I'm going to go through each of these so you don't need to worry about it. Starting at the left, we have settle, then confirm, then explore, then ask, another explore, and the final confirm. This is a very simple pattern that actually you can learn. So it's right in your mind. And if you use it as you go and ask people for things, particularly as you ask people for money, what you'll find is that it works. You'll know what you should be talking about, how you should be doing it, and you will lead and partner with the donor in making something happen that should. When you have a conversation like this, you, the solicitor, have 2 roles. You are both a conductor of the conversation. Imagine yourself as an orchestra, with an orchestra, conducting an orchestra. And you are a participant in the conversation. So you sort of have to have 2 parts of your brain. One that is always aware of your job as a conductor to move through each of these 6 slices. And the other that's actually a participant, a conversant with your donor. Now let's walk through each one of these. I'll tell you what it is you're going to do in each part of this. First, you're going to start with settling. Now, all of you know what settling is, right? That's the small talk that you do when you walk in. And I think many people don't understand why that matters, right? You certainly don't want to have 20 minutes of small talk. But a couple of minutes of small talk at the beginning of a conversation are really useful. Because when you walk into a meeting, when you walk into a meeting with a donor, you will have things on your mind from just before, and your donor is likely to have things on her mind. So perhaps it's raining out, it's wet, my feet are wet, my shoes are wet, I'm sort of drenched, maybe I got a speeding ticket on the way over, maybe I couldn't find a parking place, who knows, right? And with your donor, who knows, she may have had an argument with her partner. She may have had a really hard time getting her kid off of school that morning, right? She may be having problems at work and the boss may just have called. You don't know, but there is stuff on both sides that's still present in your mind for a couple minutes after you get together. And that conversation that you have, the settling conversation, the small talk, gives you a moment to come together. What? Maybe you're talking about the weather. Maybe you're talking about a picture on the wall. Maybe you're talking about a vacation. If you pay close attention, after a couple of minutes, you'll realize that you and your donor are actually starting to hear one another, right? You're used to your voices. You're actually focusing on the conversation. And I wouldn't advise you to take very long with that, but some of it is important, and you should be really aware of when it feels like it's time to move on. And when it is, it's your job as a conductor to say something like, shall we get to work? Right? That's a conductor kind of comment. It says, okay, now we're going to dive into what it is we're here to talk about. That's what I call a meta question, right? It's a question about the meeting. And it's your job as the conductor to make sure that you do that transition. Once you do that, you're into the next slice, which is confirm. Now, there are 2 things you need to confirm every time you ask for a gift. You want to confirm the purpose of the visit and how much time you have. Now, when you schedule the appointment, and I referred to this earlier, I hope you will have set it up specifically for asking for whatever it is you're going to ask for, so you're not surprising your donor. So you're going to want to confirm by saying something like, Sue, as you know, I'm here to talk to you about your annual fund gift this year for the Boys and Girls Club. And when we set up this appointment, we scheduled 40 minutes. Is that still all right with you? So 2 things, the purpose of the visit and the amount of time. Now, there are funny stories in the fundraising business about people going in for meetings and not confirming either the purpose of the visit or the amount of time, only to find out that something in the schedule has changed and the donor has 15 minutes instead of 40 minutes. And at the end of 15 minutes, he or she are looking at her watch and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry, something else came up and I have to go." So stop right up front and confirm. It gets everybody on the same page, gives you the parameters. It really creates a first sense of agreement. And if you know much about marketing psychology, what you find is that when early in a conversation you have reached agreement, that sets you up well for later on in the conversation. So settle and then confirm. Confirming doesn't take very long, and once you've confirmed, if you were doing things the normal way, you might be inclined to say something like, "Let me tell you what's going on at the Boys and Girls Club this year." But that's not what I want you to do. I want you instead to say something like this: "May I ask you some questions? Before I tell you about the Boys and Girls Club and what we're doing, I have some questions for you." That's, again, a conductor question. And what you're doing is you're throwing the conversation over to the donor. You're alerting them to the fact that you're going to ask them to tell you some things. Okay, what are you going to ask them about? Well, this Explore is an opportunity for you to find the intersecting interests between the donor and your organization. And if I were to tell you what it is I think you really need to prepare before you go into a donor visit, I think you should prepare questions. You should look at the donor record. You should understand what it is they're interested in. You should know how much they've given and why they've given over the years. And you should learn as much as you can about them. And what you want to be doing here is to ask them questions. You might say, for example, "Sue, I see you have given to this organization every year for the past 10 years. Is this one of the top organizations that you give to?" That's an interesting question. Or you might say, "What is it about the Boys and Girls Club that keeps you giving?" Or you might say, "I looked at the giving you've done, the total giving you've done to this organization. I see that you have given more than $50,000 over many years. That makes you one of our most remarkable donors. Why? What is it that keeps you in this? Have you had a remarkable experience with this?" Any of those questions are going to get the conversation going. And if you ask those questions and then really listen, you will find things that inform you about what it is you should be asking for or how you should be slanting your request to Sue. Right? Sue might tell you, for example, that, the Boys and Girls Club is really important to me because I have known a couple of people whose lives were really changed by that organization. Right? Some of my friends really have been important, or my life was changed by it. Or there's something in my background or past in my family that just ties me into this. Right? If you start to understand that and understand what aspect of the Boys and Girls Club speaks particularly to Sue, you're going to be able to do a much better job of asking Sue for a gift. And what you'll find is that if you ask good questions, if you prepare good questions, and you really listen, you're really curious, that Sue will lead you to where you need to be. She'll tell you what it is she wants to give to. And at that point, then you're going to be ready to ask. Then you're going to be ready to say something like, "Sue, I've been listening to you, and it strikes me that you might be interested in doing this giving this kind of a gift for this project this year. Right? Or that maybe this year you would like to do a challenge grant for someone. Right? You can shape your request to Sue based on what it is she has shared with you about her particular interest and attraction to the Boys and Girls Club. So this might interest you as another one of these conductor comments or conductor questions. And that takes you into the actual ask. Now the ask, as you can see, is the smallest slice of this pie. Sometimes it's no more than a minute or two. It certainly should not be 10 minutes, probably not even 5. Right? This is a very small little piece. And it ends with this. Sue, would you consider a gift of X to accomplish Y? Right? Now, what's fascinating about this, and frankly, when I was figuring this out, it knocked me out. What I realized is that the ask itself, would you consider a gift of X, is no more than a transition question. It's one of these conductor questions, right? We make such a big deal of it, right? We make such a big deal of preparing the case, preparing our pitch, preparing everything we're going to say. Whereas if we just stopped and asked questions, then we can have our pitch grow out of what our donor told us. And we can make a very clear and specific ask based on that. Now, what's funny about this, of course, is that if you ask people to do something that they want to do, it's much more likely that they're going to do it, right? I mean, think about it. If somebody asks you to go out to dinner to a place you've been dying to go, are you going to say no? Of course not, right? So we need to ask people to do things that they want to do, and we need to give them an opportunity to tell us what it is they want to do. If we do that, our chances of success are huge. All right, so Sue, would you consider a gift of X? And maybe this year you'd really like to do it as a challenge gift. You told me it was important for you to leverage your gifts. Of course, I'm just making that up just to give you an example. So Sue is going to think about that. You're going to give her a minute to think about that. And then you're going to go into another explore. Well, what is this explore? This explore is all about the gift. And it will depend on what Sue has told you, right? Sue may say to you, I'd really like to do that. Let's consider, what if I were to give you X and we were to, you might use it as a challenge at your upcoming gala, for example. Or she might say, before I do this, I really have to talk to my partner first. And then you're going to be exploring whether she wants you to come and meet with her partner, whether there are other questions to be answered. If it's a bigger gift you're talking about, maybe you're talking here about whether there's a pledge period, whether there's a naming opportunity. What are the specifics of the gift and how she would like to frame it? Maybe it's very simple. Maybe it's, I'd be happy to give you $1,000. It's a small gift you're asking for. Probably most of you don't go in person and ask for gifts of $1,000. So, maybe it's a gift of $5,000 or $10,000. And maybe there are some things that need to be sorted through. How is she going to pay it, right? Is she going to write you a check? Should you send her something afterwards, right? How does she want to handle that? So this entire explorer is not so much about what it is she's giving to, though it might have some of that, right? You might have asked for something that's not quite right, and she may come back to you and say, well, I'm not interested in doing that, but I'd consider doing this, right? So you're exploring, you're tying down the details of the gift so that they suit her and her needs. Once you've come to some kind of clarity about that, and you have a sense that you've come to an agreement, then you are going to confirm. And the way to do that is, again, with one of these transition questions that says something like, let's summarize and review the next steps. Or you might say something like, Sue, here's what I heard you say. Is that right? Now, in my experience, it is remarkable how often people don't hear well. The solicitors don't hear well. They're so anxious and so busy thinking about what to say that they're actually not listening well enough. So when they get to this point, it's really important that you confirm with Sue what it is she has agreed to do, or what the next steps would have to be if she's not able to make the commitment right then and there. I have had a number of times in my career when I have made mistakes at this point in a conversation. So one of the funniest was years ago when I was actually running a concert series, and it was a little bitty concert series with a really small budget. Actually, the budget of the total series was something like $10,000 or $20,000. It wasn't very big. And I went and talked to a friend of mine who was very wealthy about giving a gift. And she had given a gift of $1,000 the prior year. So I went and had lunch with her, and I said, Carol, I'd really like to ask you to consider a gift again to this concert series. Is that something you'd be willing to do? Now, in that prior year, we knew one another well, this donor and I. She was a good friend. The prior year, my mother had died, and her husband had died. So she said to me, Andrea, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to give you 2 gifts this year. I'll give you 2 gifts of $5 each. One in honor of your mother, and one in honor of my husband. I thought, well, boy, that's really nice. Thank you so much, Carol. That's just really special of you to honor those people in that way. And home I went. Woke up in the middle of the night, thought to myself, 5 each. 5. 5 what? 5 what? $5? $500? $5,000? Right? What did she give me? Now, I was a fundraising professional back. I mean, like I still am. I was in the business, and of course, my friend knew it. I called her up. I said, this is really embarrassing. I'm not a newbie in this business. I'm not a beginner, and I made a really silly error. I didn't confirm with you what it is you agreed to give. And honestly, I said, Carol, I just don't know. Are you giving $500? 2 gifts of $500 or 2 gifts of $5,000? And she didn't miss a beat. She said, Andrea, how do you know I'm not giving 2 gifts of $500,000? I have proposals on my desk for that amount right now. Well, I learned 2 lessons. First of all, never leave a solicitation meeting without confirming what someone's going to do. That's number 1. And second of all, never make assumptions about what they're going to give. That was number 2, right? I blew it on two counts. She and I are still friends, by the way, and unfortunately, she just lost her second husband to cancer. That's a sad business. She is still a very generous donor, and now and again, I still do ask her for gifts. So, all right, we get to the end of this. Let's summarize and review next steps, and that gets you to confirming. That's the confirmation, right? Once you've confirmed, right, then you're pretty well done. Then you're just your job, of course, is to follow through. Now, I want to show you this pizza slice, this half pizza, in a slightly different way. This shows you roughly the roles, the proportional roles between the solicitor and the prospective donor. If you look, starting again from the left, you look at settle. The small talk is roughly 50-50. Confirm is 90% you. You're the one who's saying, let's confirm what we're going to talk about and how much time we have, right? And the person you're talking to is saying, yes, that's right. Here's how much time I have, and yes, I understand. Then you get to the explore section, the third slice, and it's about 25% you and 75% the donor. Now, stop and think about that for a minute. Because in about 98% of all solicitations, that's not what happens. That's where you dive in and create a wall of words. But instead, you're going to want to drive this and prepare for it with questions. So you're asking questions, and then you are responding to whatever it is the donor is telling you, because you're listening like crazy here. You're not thinking about what you're going to say next. You're really getting on the page with them. So it's 25% you, 75% them. That moves you into the ask, which is the only time in the conversation when it's 100% you. But I encourage you to have it be not more than 3 minutes. And you can actually time yourself. You can glance at your watch. That moves you into the next explore, which is half you and half the donor, right? Come into clarity. And finally, you're at confirm, which again, like the last confirm, is 90% you and 10% the donor. Am I making sense here? Are you with me? Chat in and tell me if I'm making sense. I want to see you here. Are you there? Type to me. Type to me, my friends. Is it making sense? Thank you. Wonderful. Still here. Thank you so much. Yes, it is. It's so strange to talk to you this way. I can't tell you. So, okay, let us look at it from a slightly different way. Now, every time I talk to people about this, here's what happens. People want to know how long each section is going to take. And I finally just gave up resisting telling people, and I made up some numbers. The reality is you can do this kind of conversation in 10 minutes or in an hour and a half. So the numbers are truly made up, but everybody wants me to tell them what to do, so I made them up. So maybe the settle is 5 or 10 minutes. I don't know. If I were to do these slides again, I'd make it 2 to 5 minutes. The confirm I have here 2 to 3 minutes. I'd probably make it 1 to 2 minutes. The explore, I'm happy to have that be 15 to 20 minutes. The ask, I'd probably have, 2 to 3 minutes is fine. Don't go over 3 minutes. The second explore, sometimes this is really quick if it's a simple gift, and sometimes it's more complicated. So it's more honestly, it's probably 5 to 15 minutes is probably a better indicator than I have. And then finally, in the confirm, it's 3 to 5 minutes. Maybe it's 1 to 3 minutes, honestly. But you can see that the biggest part of this, the biggest part of this conversation is the part where you're talking to one another, where you're literally in conversation, where nobody is talking at anybody. What you'll find is that this is the way most conversations, intentional conversations, actually go. And that really is the way I came up with it, that I started watching carefully people's conversations when they were intentional conversations, when you wanted to make it happen and when the conversation worked well. And this is the shape of them. So while it looks big and sort of complicated, the reality is that it is simple and really quite natural. And here's how I'm going to show that to you. So I encourage you to try out this intentional conversation business, this model, in a way that has nothing to do with fundraising. Because as you practice it, you'll start to see how it works, and it won't feel so forced and kind of big and complicated. It'll just feel natural. So I'll tell you a story, and then when you get off this call and go home tonight, you can try it out. All right? So the story is this. There was a time not long ago, and I'm sure this has happened to you too, when I had a really tiring day, right? I was out. I live here in New York. I was out in the city. I had a bunch of meetings. By the time I was headed home, I was weary. And what I was quite sure of is that I didn't want to cook dinner. I just couldn't imagine it, frankly. Now, when I'm at a time in my life when I no longer have kids at home, my kids are grown. So if I had kids at home, that would have been even another layer on me that I just could have barely stood. But as it was, I was taking the subway home, and it's like, ugh, I simply don't have the energy to even think about what to cook. So I walked in the door, and my husband of many years was lying on the couch watching the news or something. It was raining out, right? In I come, and I decide that I'm going to do one of these intentional conversations. I'm going to try the model. And here's how it looked. So in the settle, I walked in, I said, hey, Tico, Tico's my husband. I said, how was your day? All right. Boy, it sure is nasty out there as I take off close my umbrella and take off my boots, and I sort of make my way in, and we have a little bit of small talk. Did you get to the pool today? Did you we're doing the settling kind of talk, right? As I drop what I brought, and he kind of moves himself from the news to pay attention to me. All right, when I have the sense that he's actually paying attention, that we're on the same place, I said, you know what? It's 5:30. Let's take just a couple minutes now and figure out what we're going to do for dinner. Now, did you hear that? I confirmed we're going to take a couple minutes, and I confirmed that we're going to figure out what we're going to do about dinner, because that's what was on my mind, right? That's where I have my intention. We're going to talk about dinner in 2 minutes. Okay, he says. Now, instead of saying, I sure don't want to cook because I'm bushed, I say to him, what are you hungry for? How's that? Right? What are you hungry for today? Now that's interesting, right? That's moving into the explorer. I might say, if I wanted to have a conductor question, I would say, Tico, is it okay? How would I put it? Well, I think I probably wouldn't ask a conductor question. I'd probably just say, what are you hungry for? Or what's on your mind for dinner? Or what would you really like to eat tonight? Right now, so that puts him back into himself. He thinks about it. He says, I just have a yen for a piece of steak, or whatever, pasta, or, I missed lunch, he says, so I'm really hungry, actually. Right? Well, that gets me able to talk where he is, not where I am. So the question is not whether I'm too tired to make dinner. The question is, what is it he wants? What does he want to do for dinner? Once I have a sense of that, then I can make my request. So if he says to me, I have a yen for a piece of steak tonight. We haven't had steak in a long time. Then I say, that's a terrific idea. I don't have steak, but how about if we go to the restaurant down the street, right? We've both been looking at it and commenting on it. It would be fun to try it out. I'm sure they have a steak there, and you know what? I'd be happy to treat you, I might say. That's the ask, of course, right? I picked up from what he wanted. I made it into an ask, right? And then I'm going to wait and see what he says in the next explore. He might say, no, he said, I'm really too tired to go out. All right, then I'm back saying, all right, you're too tired. Well, what if we order in? That would be a possibility. I could live with that. Or if he says, yeah, that's a good idea, then we're exploring how we're actually going to make that happen. Do we have to drive? Do we need a reservation? Who's going to call for the reservation? Right? We're exploring how we're going to make it happen, just like you would explore how to make the gift happen. right? And once we figured that out, then I'm confirming, all right, you're going around to get the car. I'm going to make the reservation. We're going to do it at 7 tonight, right? This is, and we're set to go. Done. It may have taken me a total of 5 minutes to get from one end of this intentional conversation to the other. And I have gotten what I wanted, which is that I didn't want to cook, by piggybacking on finding out what my husband wanted. It's an intentional conversation. You do it all the time. You do it with your kids, you do it with your partner, you do it with your boss. And again, we leave out this first explore. We leave out the possibility of finding out where the person we're talking to has shared interests with what it is we want. And if we really pay attention to that, right, if we really do that and do it well, what you're going to find is that not only does this feel like a comfortable conversation, a shared conversation, but the chances are good you're going to come up with something that's going to work. Right? It really makes sense. Practice it. Try it out. And try it out consciously. Now, before I forget, I'm going to tell you something else about this model. It's not uncommon in the fundraising business for you to have 2 or maybe even 3 people from your organization going to ask for a gift. And again, people stumble over each other when they do that, right? What they often do is, let's say you're going to go with your executive director, or if you're an executive director, you're going to go with a board member. So you get into the room with a donor. What you've done is you've prepared who's going to say what. The executive director is going to say this, and your board's going to say that, and your development director is going to say something else. So what you do is you get in a room with a donor, and each one of you talks, and the donor has no time to say anything, which makes, frankly, for a lousy solicitation. Using this model, you can actually print this out, and you can sit down with whoever you're going to go and make a call with. And you can say, okay, let's figure out who's going to be the conductor and who's going to handle which slices of the conversation. And if you figure that out in advance, then you realize that you are still designing the time, a place for the donor to be involved, which almost always gets lost if you have more than one solicitor, and even, frankly, if you have only one solicitor. So this serves as a really good planning tool if you have multiple people making a solicitation call. It's pretty clever, don't you think? Now, you know, when I started doing webinars some years ago, and they made me so nervous, I just couldn't bear staring at my computer screen and pretending you were there. So I would take my old yellow cat, and I would put him behind my computer, and I would talk to him. When he yawned, I knew I was in trouble. But anyway, I think that the most important characteristic of someone having an intentional conversation, asking someone for something, is being curious. If you get genuinely curious about what the other person wants and are creative enough to bring that into so that it dovetails with something you want, you will be successful. So practice being curious. Like anything else, curiosity is something we can build those skills. And think of your role as a sounding board. Now, if you've ever played a big piano like this, the way the sound comes out of a piano is that the resonance of the strings actually hits this big sounding board inside, and that's what makes the sound come out. Think of yourself as a sounding board to what your donor is trying to tell you. You're trying to find out what your donor wants. You're trying to make that so that that's what's present in the room in a bigger way, and use that as the way to then shape your ask. So if you are curious and a sounding board for your donor, you will be remarkable. You will find it remarkable, both how fun it is, because these conversations are fun, and how successful you are. Because when the conversation is really about your donor and what the donor wants to do, then both your Lionheart and your donor's Lionheart are on the upside of the teeter-totter, right? That's when you want to come together to make something happen. It really feels like magic if you try it this way. You'll be surprised. Or maybe you won't be surprised, because Kilstead told you. Now, I think that is my last slide on this. On this, is that true? Let me see if that's my last slide. Yes, I'm going to take your questions in just a second, but let me tell you, if you want to track me down, and I didn't tell you anything about me, I hope you know a little about me, you can find me at Capital Campaign Masters, where I blog about capital campaigns and I do pre-campaign coaching. In fact, I do that at the moment for a Boys and Girls Club in California. But I do a lot of that for organizations all over the country. I provide a lot of, the Capital Campaign Masters provides a lot of great campaign readiness campaign materials. And if you want to know about the other piece of me, you can go to AndreaKilstead.com, where I also blog, but that blog is about subjects that just happen to interest me or are on my mind. That's more of a hobby than a professional thing. So let's go back here. Let me see if I can get back here. And then let me take your questions. Who has questions? Brandy, I see here. Can you use this model over the phone? Yeah, great question, Brandy. I think you can use this model everywhere. It's a matter of rejigging your own mind so that you put yourself as the person whose job it is to draw out the other person rather than the person who is doing all the talking. And I think you can do it over the phone. I think you can do it in Skype. I think you can do it walking with someone. I think you can do it sitting down with someone. I think you can do it with your kids. I think you can do it everywhere. It just takes a little practicing and a willingness to get your intentions out of the way so that you know where you're going, but you invite the person you're talking to in as a partner rather than as someone you're just demanding something from. I encourage you really to practice it. Try it out, practice it. You don't have to tell anybody you're trying it out. You don't have to tell them that you're manipulating them. You know, I didn't say to my husband, hey, I'm going to manipulate you to do what it is I want you to do, right? That would have blown it for sure. I just had to really get in a place where my desire not to cook dinner dovetailed with something he wanted to do, which was to eat a steak, and we didn't have a steak in the house. So I never even had to say that I didn't want to cook dinner. It was just a logical outcome of our conversation. So practice it and sort of laugh about it, think about it, do it intentionally, do it consciously. And you'll find that after a while it becomes a way of being. You get yourself out of the center and you put the other person into a more prominent position. And then you're not, remember those two pictures? Then you're not building a wall of words. Then you're really having fun talking to somebody. It's quite transformational, really. Anybody else have questions? Is it making sense to you? Is this something you could try? How would you try it? Type in a way in which you might try to use this. Could you go home tonight and get someone to take you out to dinner?
Andrea, there was one question that was asked earlier.
Yeah.
by John Lacey. And
Yes.
he said, I love your five story, and I have a question related to that. If you lean on staff, have no DoD, how do you research what the most likely dollar amount number to anchor and ask should be?
Right, right. So, good question. What's the most likely dollar amount? If you really don't know what the dollar amount is, if you don't know what's right, I advise you, and there are ways that you can find that out. I mean, well, let me answer your question directly first, which is that I always want to look and see what people give, right? If I can see what other gifts people have given, that'll give me probably one of the best clues as to what kind of a gift is going to feel right to them. But sometimes it's hard to figure that out, or sometimes you're trying to move their relationship up. So maybe they've given you $50. You know they have the capacity, or you believe they have the capacity to give you $5,000, or maybe $100,000, but you don't know what the ask should be. And in a case like that, I would put a couple of options on the table. I would turn it over to the donor. I would say, John, you've been a relatively low-level donor here, right? And I know that sometimes you give bigger gifts to people. Would you be interested in considering a gift of $10,000 this year, right? Or is that something that doesn't feel right to you? Would you rather give a gift of $5,000? What are your giving patterns that feel right to you? If you ask people those things, they'll tell you. But I would always want to put a number or a couple of numbers out there that are stretch numbers to give the donor a chance to ping off of those, right? I would never say to a donor, you've been a low-level donor so far, what would you like to give this year, right? I would instead say, you sound so passionate and interested in this organization. I wonder if you would consider giving a gift of $5,000 this year. Then listen. They'll tell you. I promise you, donors will tell you. If you've had a good conversation with them, and when you really listen to them, they'll give you some clues. You might want to say, in fact, here's another thought about that. You might want to say something like, John, do you like being at the top of the giving pyramid? Right? Do you like giving leadership gifts? Is that something you've done and you enjoy doing? Or do you prefer to give some, steady, smaller gifts? What's your pattern of giving, and how do you figure it out? That's a great question for a donor. You ask them and they'll tell you. I promise you, ask people who they are, what they like to do, how they like to do things. If you are honestly curious, they will share it with you, and then you'll know what to do. Right? I get so tired of this cultivating donors, kind of pretending. This isn't pretense. It's not pretense. And even this intentional conversation, it's not manipulation. It's creating a partnership, really, and valuing the honesty and integrity of that partnership, trusting the donor that they will be willing to be partners with you to come to something that's going to be good for you and good for them. That's the best of fundraising. All right. Any other questions? Did I miss any others? Heather? Anybody else have questions before we go? It's been just about a little over an hour, I think. I don't blame you for wanting to go. Who wants to listen to anybody for an hour?
I don't see any more, so
Okay,
I think
well,
that's it.
thank you all for being with me. I really appreciated your being here today, and I hope that that you'll come and take a look at Capital Campaign Masters. Sign up for the blog if you're in campaign planning mode. If you're interested in things that are more far-reaching than that, go to AndreaKilstead.com, and I would look forward to hearing from any one of you. Heather, thank you so very much for inviting me to be in this series, and I hope that you have lots of intentional conversations.
Yes, thank you so much for that. That was amazing.
Okay. Thanks, Heather. Bye-bye.
Bye.